everyone, and welcome to our next webinar in our series this week about 5 ways to boost your profits in 2019. My name's Ian Schaefer, and I'm one of the Senior Product Specialists here at UDA Technologies, and we're actually really excited to talk about this topic today because it's the most important thing for any profitable business to be able to go through and track all the different ways to cut some extra costs and turn what we have in our current estimates to our benefit. Now, helping me talk about this today, I've actually got Holly Gibson here in the office with me today.
Hi, everyone.
And we also have Sydney Dorsey manning the keyboards again this week, helping with any questions that we have coming through. So make sure that you guys take a look at that GoToWebinar panel. We're going to be following those questions regularly to make sure that we've got all of those great answers to those fantastic questions that you guys are going to be sending to. And she'll also flag many of them for us to review as we're going through the webinar today. So definitely keep an eye on those questions, keep them coming, and we'll be going through those again here as we work. Now, just to give you guys a little bit of background on what we hope to cover today, today's webinar is going to be all about making more money given the tools that we have available both in ConstructionSuite, Construction Online, or for just some common practices and some setting the right mindset. Now, to help with this, of course, we've been working with various different construction companies. At this point, we've got how many users, Holly?
Just over 600,000 users at this point. Which
is a fantastic number of current users. But of course, over the past almost 20 years, we've gotten to work with all sorts of different kind of companies from different mindsets, different industries, even different countries. We're covering almost 80 different countries now, and we're managing probably close to about $80 billion in jobs every day.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we get to work with, so many people doing so many different types of jobs. I hope all of you in attendance today got an email from me earlier this week or read through that. I try to keep you guys up to date on the webinars that we're hosting. But when I was putting together the information for the email that you guys got this week, one of the things that we found was just some information on how razor thin those profit margins often are in this industry. I know that the average UDA customer isn't quite that thin on their margins, but we were seeing numbers as low as 2 to 5% for some types of jobs. And I know, Ian, we see, usually better performance than that for our customers. But our goal is, in an industry that already has pretty thin margins and a lot of room for, 1 or 2 things to go wrong. And suddenly that really does start eating into your profit, to really figure out ways to help you guys, first of all, build in the margins that you want to your projects and estimates. And also really protect your business against those things that can eat into those profits.
Absolutely. And so, of course, here to take a look, we've got 5 different ways that you can maximize your profits, even by doing something as simple as keeping those contracts amount the same and just finding money in the right places or eliminating steps. Now, the first in this that I'd like to talk to you about is actually some of the tools that we offer in working with the technology and using that technology to keep your operating costs down. So we're going to start by taking a look at some of the tools that we offer for automation and for going paperless. Now, the reason that I want to start here is because one of the most interesting conversations that I actually had the chance to join at the International Builder Show was a group that was talking about how big of a paper budget they have. Paper, physical printouts and ink for things like blueprints of somewhere close to $20,000 a year for paper and printing, for blueprints, for manuals and paper versions of purchase orders or PDFs or whatever it is, anything that they might be printing out. $20,000. That's a lot of trees. And what I find most interesting about that is everything that they were printing because they didn't know that there were better tools out there. Now, along those lines, of course, with UDA Technologies, we offer a couple of key tools that allow you to better manage your information. And before we even dive into the estimating things, I'd love for you guys to kind of go through and figure out what you're putting on paper and how you can eliminate that. Some of the easiest things that you can work with in ConstructionSuite, for example, here we are in the main interface. Here in ConstructionSuite, we have a calendar that allows you to come in and view everything that you've got going on for each job. And you can filter this calendar down to specific resources, to specific projects. We color code a lot of this information. I've got an interesting colors system up today, but we color code most of this information to make it quickly recognizable, and we do something that you can't really do easily with paper. We set it up so that it's very, very fluid. This information can be adjusted or filtered to give you anything under the sun. So if you need to figure out where you have to go for a specific job, you can do it here. Filter down to a project or a specific group of projects. Task management is here as well. But more importantly, in ConstructionSuite, we take all of this desktop information and we connect it to Construction Online through SuiteLink. So you can actually carry all of this information with you in the palm of your hand when you take it to Construction Online and put it on your phone. Now, I know we've got a lot of current users here with us that have, actually our most successful users have both the desktop system and the online system, and this is one of the most valuable tools that you've got in there. A lot of people work with things like Excel for estimating, or they come to us from Excel. Or they might come to us from some of those older estimating platforms. Sage has probably about 10 of them. You'll find some other ones. I think RBS was another that's very, very limited in how much information they can offer. But this allows you, this automation and this upload capability just gives you the ability to take the work that you're putting in here and makes it filterable, adjustable, but most importantly for Construction Online, it actually takes all that information and automatically chops it up for the people who are supposed to pay attention. This is my view for Construction Online, but if we come take a look at the team, you'll have individual team members who actually get their own special view for what information you're sharing with them, and you don't have to print it up. You also save a ton of time because you don't have to hire somebody whose sole job is to call these people. Now, you probably will still check in on them from time to time. I mean, let's be real. Some of these guys don't always pay attention to their emails. Some of our subcontractors are still a little old school. I was just recently working with a group down in Orlando, and they had a lot of clients, or a lot of subcontractors rather, who don't have smartphones. Some of their own team are the same way. It makes it a little bit more difficult, but not impossible, because they still have the ability to receive text messages. Construction Online automates that too, as does ConstructionSuite. So again, little things like that just cut out some of those small steps. A couple of minutes here, maybe 20 or 30 minutes over the course of the week, which then in turn turns into a few hours a month, which turns into half a work week over the course of the year. That might be a vacation or something. Or it might be better use putting together some new jobs.
Yeah, it sure might. I mean, that time adds up. You hear the saying, of course, all the time is money, but that really is true. When we look at ways to be and run as a profitable company, we really have to pay attention to both sides. You definitely have to pay attention to those estimates and job costs and how we put that together, but we really have to pay attention to how we're operating day to day as a company. When I think about that $20,000 paper budget, what that same company could invest in using a tool like our plan room here to manage their plans, store the documents, make that information accessible. You won't cut out paper 100%, but they could slash that budget by a ton, and that starts to add up into little bits and pieces there, eat up little percentages or half a percentages of what could normally be profit, and those things then in turn add up to a 5% difference when you add them all up together. So there's a lot of ways that you can really leverage technology to take both large and small steps towards just running overall more lean, more profitable, in a more efficient way. Of course, it's great to go paperless and convenient, but it really does impact your bottom line.
Yeah, and when we were talking, Holly, you mentioned earlier that a lot of these companies have very thin profit margins, like a 2% to a 5% number. Well, if you think about it, if it's $1 million company, $20,000, that is 2%. There's your, that's it right there. That $20,000 is your profit target.
Yeah, we've worked with, of course, again, so many clients over the years. I've been at UDA 7.5 years now, so I've had a chance to work with thousands of you guys at this point, but probably one of my most memorable and very favorite sort of conversations and also kind of quotes that I have from a client that I've worked with is that their company was able to double profit margins within the first year of putting ConstructionSuite in place. And that was even before really some of the new tools like the Plan Room and Construction Online came along, really just best practices. They were able to really leverage this technology to see their profit margin double within that 12-month period. So I love seeing that type of measurable success.
Yeah. And again, for our first topic on 5 ways to boost profits, leveraging that technology, automation, and just taking advantage of the fact that we all have a computer with us everywhere we go in that smartphone. These tools and these resources really do allow you to free up some of those budget line items so that you can better use that money on something that's going to once again boost your company to the next level. The most successful companies that we have the chance to work with are constantly finding ways to maneuver that money into something that makes them look a little bit more professional, a little bit more successful, or maybe just a little bit more fun. Bringing customers in and having them enjoy the experience because you can provide them with some crazy new technology, like we were working with the Microsoft HoloLens, just a headpiece that allows you to kind of draw on walls. Those kind of technologies are things that you could then in turn invest in to bring more interested clients, more engaged customers who are in turn willing to pay more money, and those are the people that we want to work with. Now that brings us though to item number 2, accurate estimates. Now we're talking about some of the technology and leveraging some of these tools. Again, up until recently, Holly, I think we had measured our number one competitor as being either paper or Excel. A lot of people will say, I just do it one way or the other, or I do a spreadsheet and then I print it and then I write it all on there. Still, some of the most common things that we've heard, even though there have been many better technologies for decades.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's a lot of technology out there in the market with what we offer here, at UDA really being the most powerful and most accurate you can really get your hands on. But with that being said, when I work with brand new clients who are coming to us for a solution, really evaluating ways that they can find technology that's right for their business and then, use that to really transform things like their profits and kind of day-to-day operations, the most common scenario that I see is an Excel-based estimating program. So I feel like that's really our biggest competitor is we're working in Excel, typing that up. Of course, back to your mention from earlier, our point number 1, usually then what that looks like is some version of that gets hand-typed into perhaps QuickBooks, and well, that's it. Sometimes that gets hand typed into a proposal, or sometimes that's just printed up straight from Excel. So that's kind of what we see coming in as being pretty common for people who are not yet using software to be operating off of an Excel-based system or a paper-based system, which may have worked well and really gotten them to a certain point in their business. But when we look at how to then really shave off those expenses or start to increase profits, that's really where Excel really wouldn't be able to compare to what they would be able to do with an estimating platform like OnCost and ConstructionSuite, for example. Yeah,
and the best way that I've ever heard it described is that system was good enough to get you here, to us. And so from here, we can take it the next step and start eliminating all of those hours of double data entry. The bookkeeper doesn't have to re-enter the same information. We take that and we actually just pass it over to QuickBooks directly. You don't have to spend hours trying to type up that proposal. If you bring on another estimator, you don't have to panic or be really anxious or concerned about whether or not they're going to accidentally overwrite one of your critical formulas in that Excel spreadsheet. Again, these things, they don't happen anymore. And the first place to go look in ConstructionSuite is actually here in the estimating section, where we already have many different estimate templates available for you, built off of our years and years of experience working with companies in the industry. We've taken some of the most effective methods that we've found and templated them to give you guys a fantastic launching point, a starting point, that you can then customize and make your own. And what I find the most fun about this particular section is, if you guys have a few different styles of estimating you guys want to do, you can make templates for everything. In fact, with our partnership with companies like Remodelers Advantage, I see a lot of companies who will come into and build one big master estimate template, and then a smaller version for maybe a kitchen or a master bath, maybe one for an addition or a garage conversion. Some of our custom home builders will go in there and they'll build, they've got one massive estimate for a large plot, or they've got a small estimate for a quick custom home. Different sizes, different scales, depending on who they're working with. Some of our clients are building super athlete, multi-million-dollar homes, and I've seen some of the really big ones there too.
That's right.
And even on the commercial side, tenant improvement projects or ground-up construction. Some
retail, restaurants, when I think about some of the clients I've worked with on that side where maybe you're a GC who has a contract with Target or Ulta beauty stores or, some sort of restaurant. I've worked with people that worked, with like a Domino's Pizza or, any chain you can imagine. A lot of times what we see with those are estimates that can then be templated out because they really tend to be the same from job to job. You also have on, some of the more custom projects, yes, differences, but when you think about still the steps and from a financial standpoint, what you're going to need to account for, there's still a lot of commonality. So some can be templated out to I think a greater degree than others, but all types of projects can really benefit from using a master template. And when you think about the way that's going to relate back to the profitability on the job, as we kind of dive into some of those best financial practices, this is going to be, kind of building and creating that estimate. It starts right here. How much time do you spend just putting together an estimate or a bid? At this point, you may not even have the job. So the clock is ticking. We're already looking at what that profit's going to look like. The estimate needs to be accurate. So we don't want to go in too low or too high. You don't want to, get yourself into a situation where, you've bid way too low and there's no way you're going to come in under that budget, or the opposite where you don't get the job because the estimate's way too high. So we want to be accurate, but we want to be fast. We don't want to invest 3, 4, 5 working days trying to put together an estimate or a bid for a project that we haven't even won yet in many cases. Now, I've worked with companies who do charge to do estimates, so that's one way that you can approach it. Definitely, though, when you look at the way you could use technology to leverage that, using those templates already is cutting. I mean, in most cases, you'll cut the estimate time by at least half. In many cases, more than that. And I know we've got many of you guys out there who are already using, ConstructionSuite for estimating. And I've probably already seen the benefits of what that can do in terms of time. When I think about those clients I work with who come in and are using an Excel-based system, it's not unusual for them to tell me that it takes somewhere between 3 and 5 days per estimate for them to, put that together.
Yeah, in fact, I've even heard more extreme examples where people seem to be comfortable with the idea of it taking sometimes weeks to put those estimates together. And again, I say comfortable with that because that's what they know. They don't realize that these things can be done even faster. We occasionally kind of revisit some of our really wow clients, people who have taken tools like this one and made the estimating process go from days or weeks down to, we've got at least one client that I think of every time this comes up who can do a complete tear down rebuild, destroy the house that was on the lot, clear it all out, build a new custom home, and he does the estimate for that in 15 minutes. That gets him that rough start. Mm-hmm. Always boggles my mind when he talks about this process, but it's easy to see how things come together because one of the first things that he does is he comes through and he takes one of the templates just like this one and he goes in and he connects the dots for a lot of these areas where he might take something like plumbing fixtures and rather than having it detailed, he'll make an assembly out of it. This just means that he's got one quantity that he plugs in, and that just automatically takes care of all the rest of the sections in this subcategory. Or he starts to connect subcategories together with the same kind of measurements or quantities. We always do takeoffs, and you'll find takeoffs in Redline Plan Room, for example, where you can do a quick calculation on an area. You could then take that area and apply it as a dimension. In the estimating tab here, you can set dimensions within your estimate as well, and that just takes that square footage and says, hey, for flooring in all the bedrooms, we've got whatever the dimension value is for the square footage, and that applies in not only in flooring, but maybe in some of the finish areas, or maybe if we're doing an office space, Holly, like you were talking about earlier, that might also apply for things like ceiling areas and things like that as well. So it's just some of those quick little tools to help get us there faster.
Exactly. So when we think about, using on-cost estimating to boost that profitability, you're looking at two things, I think, really. One is the speed. So things like templates and tools like that. Really, there's so much in on-cost that can really help you do this faster while still maintaining the accuracy. I think the other part, and there's so much that we could touch on when it comes to the components of creating an accurate estimate, but one that I know we wanted to highlight specifically today is actually a pretty straightforward one when it comes to profit, and that is best practices. Once you start to put those initial costs in, what are going to be the best practices within the estimate for applying markup? So we wanted to take a look at several of the options that OnCost offers for how you can apply markup both to the estimate as a whole, so be able to really plug in some numbers that are going to apply to that whole estimate, as well as to different pieces of the estimate. Ian, I know you work with so many clients and have done so much training and coaching and helping people really put this together. What are some of the best practices that you recommend here, and what are some of the common mistakes that you see people making?
Well, that's a great segue into this too, because the most important thing for me when it comes to accurate estimating, and what I see, again, what I'll call as the experienced, profitable companies, people who have been doing business for 20 years profitably. These companies always do the same thing. When they're putting together their estimates, they'll put in a quantity and a unit cost. And like for labor, here as an example, if I've got my own plumber that I'm using on this, we might be charging $30, or we might be paying him $30 per hour, but this isn't how much he costs. Where's my little per hour in here? There we go, per man hour. This isn't how much he's going to cost us as a company. This is just his rate that we charge. Now, this is an important number because we need to know exactly how many hours he's going to be working on the job. But to add to this, we know that there's going to be an additional cost, a burden, if you will, to having him employed. And to get to this number, we can expose a few additional columns here. We'll turn on the line item markup and the dollar markup. And this is where we can start to go in and add the additional value for what we're building. These inline markups would apply for things like the labor burden, where we're saying, we might pay him $30 an hour, but he really costs us, let's say, an extra $25 per hour for things like his uniform. Or we're paying for the gas in his truck. Maybe he's got a cell phone. We got to cover workman's comp and liability insurance. These are all critical things, and within the estimate, you can set that as a line item markup. But more importantly, you can actually make this a global setting. You can actually come back up to the estimating tab and make it apply to everything that we mark as labor. This is something that you don't do, you don't find in most of the Excel-based estimates. But we do this just as a default. We know that this is important. We have to get in there and apply this additional markup. And this for all labor items, everything that we put in for our man hours, maybe that's going to be an extra 80% on top of what we pay the guy or our teams, whoever they may be. And that just goes through and globally applies these things for all of labor. The same thing applies for things like materials or equipment rentals. With materials especially, you get some of those high dollar items. Maybe you guys have a very special, hard to acquire cabinet material or something like that. We're using some kind of special wood and it's got a fantastic finish on it, and it becomes a very expensive set of cabinets. Well, the cabinetry company or the millwork team, they're going to give you a price for it on how much it's going to cost you. And they might not say that it includes shipping and handling, but you're going to have to pay that. So you know that these materials are going to have an extra cost as well. So we can go account for that too. Set a classification markup for all materials, and maybe that's going to be 10% for all material deliveries. That's going to cover all of the additional trips back and forth between the job site and the shop or the hardware store or the lumber yard. These things have costs, and this is just an easy way to catch those costs without fudging the numbers in the estimate and losing our ability to track those values properly. This is most important for me because job costing makes no sense if you make up numbers. But if you try to keep a nice, tight, accurate estimate, it does.
Yeah, that's right. And I know that's a mistake, Ian, that you and I have both seen our clients make personally and kind of worked with people on, is that very often if you're not aware or haven't gone in and looked at the different markup and margin options available to you and on cost, you may be tempted when you have situations like that to really do exactly that, fudge the numbers. In fact, I worked with a client last week who told me they were doing that exact thing. So rather than, applying class markups over and above what their general profit margin was going to be for the job, they knew that certain things just were going to require a little bit more. So they just put in their cost as being more. So they just upped that number. And they actually had a couple of categories where things were going to be lower. And so in those, they were actually underbidding to make up for the fact that they had put a higher markup than that category needed. So it was a little, ask a few questions, it was a little confusing to kind of get to the right number, and it made it almost impossible to track with any sort of accuracy the budget or the actual job cost, because at that point those numbers really don't mean as much.
Yeah, and what I always find interesting about those jobs in particular, you've got a contract amount, and you might come in under that contract amount, but you have no idea how accurate it is. Or most importantly, if you're constantly going through and kind of rearranging the numbers or bidding too high, deliberately bidding high in some areas and low in other areas, you won't be able to catch some of the most important price changes. Like, what was it, about a year and a half ago? Lumber costs almost doubled in certain areas in the country. And our clients caught it pretty quickly, because they were able to see that they're spending way more money than they thought they would be, and they were able to update all of the other estimates that they were building at that time, because they saw those costs going up for lumber. But those companies who are going in there and fudging the numbers, those are the ones who are now out of business, because those first couple of jobs cost them a little bit more money, but they didn't update their estimates accordingly. So then the next few jobs that they tried to build to make up for that loss lost them even more. And then the other ones that they were building to try to make up for the loss on the second round lost them even more. And now they're not in business anymore. And that makes up for about 50% of new construction companies that go out of business in that first year. That's part of the reason why. They're not trying to bid accurately. They're not trying to get raw numbers. They're not going to resources and tools like RS Means to find a rough starting point for that price. They're just winging it. I'll just say $10,000 for this, and I'll say $8,000 for that. I don't know how much any of this stuff costs. Again, recipe for disaster. So take advantage of all of these tools, and dear God, please pay attention to the estimates that you have. Keep those prices pretty accurate and apply those changes to any future estimates, or again, as you go. Save over your old estimate template if you find that you're making a lot of changes, so that you guys have a repeatable process for every time moving forward.
That's right. So when we look at putting that template together, putting the estimate together, we've looked at individual line item markup, so we can go and mark up an individual line by a little bit more, whether that be a flat dollar amount or a percentage. We've looked at markups that can apply to a classification. Of course, if you're familiar with on cost or even construction online estimating, you know that there's also then the company overhead and margin, where we're looking at markups or percentages that can be applied to the entire estimate. I know, of course, we were discussing before we got started that one of the most common questions that I get on this front is two things. One is that sometimes people don't realize that you can use this in conjunction with the other types of markups to get that final number that you need. So that's an important thing to note, is that best practice would be to use this overhead and margin tab, and then also use the other types of markup where needed to arrive at your final correct number. The other most common question that we get on this section is just about some of the options that we offer in terms of ways that this can be applied, kind of a percent of margin versus percent of cost. So sometimes I'll get a call and someone will tell me, hey, Holly, I marked my estimate up by 20%, but the number's all wrong. I know you've gotten that before as well. Can you talk a little bit about best practice and where these different types of markup are going to really come into play for our customers?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And oddly enough, Holly, it feels like an almost constant discussion. Again, I've been here for almost a decade myself, and over the course of all those years, that has always come up. And it's always been confusing, because most people assume that there's only one number that you can possibly calculate that percentage off of. But it's interesting to me because when they have the conversation with the bookkeeper's talking about one calculation method, they're talking about the other, and who's right? Who's making the most money in that case? Well, this is interesting because for me, I always find that it's important to know which one's right so that you know what you're estimating off of, so that you know when you make a change, you can predict it better. Now, in order to do that, we have the two options that you guys will have access to here in ConstructionSuite. The first one is percent of costs. So this one is fairly straightforward. I'm just going to go against my own recommendations and put in a number here so that we've got something to work off of in this case. So this job is going to be 98,0520. No, 98,520. I've got my markups in place. Let's zero that out. See, it's helping me. There we go. Nice round number, $100,000 contract. This is what we're going to be working off of today to show you the difference between these two calculations. Now, the first one, again, is a percent of costs. This is what most of us think of when we're doing cost plus projects or time and materials projects, or if we're just talking about a 20% markup or a 20% margin. Sometimes people will mistakenly think this is the one. If you're adding a 20% of costs, it's taking that subtotal for the job, the $100,000, and it's just taking 20% of that and adding it on top. Now we've got $120,000, and it's a pretty simple formula. It's going to cost me $100,000. I'm adding 20% to that. New grand total is going to be $120,000. Simple math. Now if we were to take the same number and make it a percent margin, what we're looking at in this case is just a different number to calculate off of. Now that 20%, that's 20% of our contract amount. Our contract is $125. If you take 20% of $125, sure enough, it's $25,000. The remaining 80%, or 4/5, that's how much the job costs us. It costs us 80%. We're making 20%, and it gives us the grand total of $125,000. So right there, you can see that there's a difference, a $5,000 difference because of a drop-down. There's just a drop-down menu that gives you $5,000 more. That's a lot of steak dinners. Now, with that percentage, the easiest way to understand which one's right is when you look at your P&L report out of QuickBooks. Now, hopefully, most of you who are joining us today, I expect you to know roughly what the numbers are for your job. And when you're looking at this, if you kind of imagine what the P&L report looks like, they've got a whole lot of numbers in there, probably cost of goods sold. How much do all your jobs cost you? And then it starts to talk about income and the difference between your costs and your expenses and then the income amount. The difference, which it'll give you on there as a gross margin, that's the difference between how much it costs and how much is left. That gross margin is a percent margin. That percentage that they give you is here. QuickBooks is already giving you this number. So when you say, what is our, I already see one of the questions come through, what should we use as a target margin, or what should that be? Well, take a look at what you want your numbers to look like in QuickBooks. If you're looking at how much it costs you, and then from that you figure out how much money you want to make, for a lot of like residential builders, for example, that gross profit, or the gross number, the gross margin, is usually going to be somewhere around 30%. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. For residential remodelers, the recommendation is usually a little higher, maybe 35. I've seen some commercial builders who get that number down to maybe 15%. And that's going to cover, again, your overhead, your company's overhead. How much money does it cost to operate a business? It's going to cover your profit margin too, and that's why we give you some of these extra ones in here. But really, that's the most important part. How are you coming up with those numbers when you're talking about what you want your budget to be for the year? And just make sure that you're using the same terms here. Now,
exactly, and make sure that, you know, when you're thinking about the health of your business overall throughout that year, that you have made a purposeful choice here about what to use. Sometimes what will happen is you're maybe using a 20% of cost. And when you think about that final number, Ian, that you arrived at there, that $20,000 on top of that 100, well, that $20,000 isn't 20% of 120,000. It's only 20% of the first 100. That means that the overall margin on that job is what, around 16, just over 16, something like that.
Yeah, roughly.
So, you know, sometimes you'll see businesses come to kind of closer to the end of the year and say, well, where did that missing profit go? It didn't really go anywhere. They were just assuming that 20% meant one thing, and reality it meant something else. So making a definitive choice here and kind of knowing how you want to move forward with that will help you arrive at not only the right number for this estimate, but the right number for your company at the end of the year.
Yeah, and if there is ever a question on which one you should be using, percent margin or percent of costs, it really comes down to what type of contracts you do. If you are doing cost plus contracts or time and materials jobs, it's the time and materials plus a percentage, or a cost plus a percentage, or maybe a fixed fee. Mm-hmm. If you're doing any other kind of jobs, you're probably going to want to put it in as a percent margin. And you can, by the way, add in multiple percent margins in here as well. That's our goal. So if you know that you've got an overhead percentage of about 20%, and you're shooting for a target profit margin of about 5%, that's going to give you an overall gross margin of 25%, which then means that a quarter of every dollar that comes into the company mm-hmm. is going toward either running the company or profit for the company.
That's right. And one thing too that's a common question here before we move on to job costing. I know we have some job costing things that we want to cover really to help you start to see on a project by project basis where your margins stand as the job goes on. One common question here on the overhead and margin and markups that you apply is, when I put this together, and I think it's a pretty common reason for fudging some of those numbers too, is when I put this together and print it up for my client, though, won't they see that? And so certainly sometimes you may have contracts with your client where you need to be very transparent and have an agreed upon markup there and want to show that, so you can, when you generate the proposal, be very transparent with those numbers. When you generate the proposal, you also have the option though to prorate those numbers throughout your categories, so that those margin or that overhead and margin effectively disappears into the proposal, giving the client their final number without you having to disclose or give them on a line by line basis exactly what those margins were you were counting on.
Yeah, and that's another advantage that ConstructionSuite offers, or Construction Online might offer, over a system like Excel. Mm-hmm. If your goal is to just print that Excel spreadsheet, well, guess what? You're giving them everything. You might as well just be an open book. And your customer then is going to take those numbers, and they're going to go to the store and they're going to try to price match. And they're going to say, well, you're charging me $5,000 for these counters, but I can go to Home Depot and buy them for $2,000. That's
not the same thing, right?
Not at all.
Not at all.
And so it is important to do these things. Mm-hmm. You know that there's going to be added costs. You're the experts. You know how much it's really going to cost. And if you're working with somebody who does think that they can DIY their way through it, they're going to pay for that DIY project, and then they're going to pay you for your costs. And so what you're doing by providing them a number that they're not going to try to weaponize, mm-hmm. you're giving them a number that you can explain and that they can be comfortable with. They're just going to make the right choice the first time instead of a couple of wrong choices before they eventually work with you. And so again, when you take a look at that proposal wizard, we give you options like that to be able to take that information and make it useful and valuable not only to the customer, but to your sales team as well. They can go through and choose options like, here's we're getting into the body, they can choose things like, we want to prorate that company overhead and margin. Mm-hmm. Maybe we don't want to show them how much each individual item or subcategory would cost as well. We just want a grand total for each category. You can do that. You have all these different options, and it takes you no extra time to do this. In fact, the system's also it's helping you out in this case because it remembers what your preferred settings are. If this is it, if this is what you like to have every single time, great news. It's going to give you that every single time. If you want to make some changes to it and then use that from now on, it's still going to offer that every time. So as you go through and you make these decisions, the system is, again, taking advantage of the fact it has now learned that this is the best way for you to sell, so it's going to help you sell that way every time. And then there it is. It's got the best detail for you, and it organizes and breaks everything down in a way that you're comfortable. Now, along those lines, too, as we start to dive into some of this additional information, going from the accurate estimates and all these percentages and everything like that, the next question, I'll call it point number 3, that's going to be the next most important thing you can do with any of your estimates. That's job costing. So I thought it was going to cost this much money. How much did I actually spend? Did we make enough money on that to cover that spending? Do I need to adjust my estimate moving forward because I spent too much? All of these questions, they come up constantly. And the most painful conversation that I have with new users, new people coming in and adopting our systems, is that conversation where they think that that process where they do their job costing is supposed to happen 6 months after the job is done. Mm-hmm. Or they finally admit that that's when it happens. Oh, I don't know how much money I spent until the whole job is closed. Again, that hurts. It hurts my heart. We're looking at this information, and some of the best parts of ConstructionSuite and Construction Online, both of them offer these tools. They give you the ability to take this fantastic estimate that we put together and send it over to QuickBooks. It takes 10 seconds. Once it gets to QuickBooks, we could start doing things like progress invoicing off of it, or ConstructionSuite gives you the ability to send over purchase orders. How much did we have in contract with, let's check totals by resource. How much did we have with Ajax Supply? Looks like $17,000. Great, there's a purchase order in QuickBooks for $17,000. Even better, the bookkeeper, well, in this case, Holly, you're probably selling the job, so I'll play the bookkeeper in this case. So as the bookkeeper, I know what the contract is supposed to be. I know that it's $17,000, $17,814. If I get a bill from Ajax Supply that says that this job has $25,000, yeah, I'm not paying that. I'm kicking that back to them and saying, nice try. We're not paying that for this job. Did you accidentally combine jobs? Or if this number is right, I'm going to be calling my project manager or my site supervisor or the foreman to figure out if there was an approved change order that they never told me about. You know, otherwise, I have all the tools that I need to know if I'm spending money correctly. Most importantly, though, after we pay those bills, maybe every week or once a month or however often we're paying the bills at Holly at your company, once that's done, all I need to do is come into and click this option to import all of my costs back into the ConstructionSuite estimate so that at any point, Holly, you could go into this estimate and see exactly where we stand on this job. It's showing us as often as we want. I'm going to say every week it's going to show you where you stand on this job so you can make smart decisions a few weeks in.
Not a few months after. So I think that's the biggest, kind of takeaway there is we want to make sure that we have that information and that we're using it to make decisions in real time or much closer to real time than 3 months, 6 months post job. Because what normally will happen by that time is by the time you're 6 months past, let's just call this job number 1, you've probably already bid on jobs number 2, 3, and 4, perhaps, in that same time frame. Well, if we're coming in over budget or we need to make an adjustment and we don't know until after the fact, you've probably now haven't estimated accurately for those next, 3 jobs either. Now, when as you're looking at, okay, where we've imported those actuals in, there's so many things that you can now do with that information. Like you'll notice here we have a nice red $32, so I can
That's
see.
Not nice.
It's actually not nice, you're right. But it's nice that I can see it because now I know, okay, here's something that needs my attention. So that's the next part of it is not only are we pulling that information in, but now what can we do with it? Well, what we do in ConstructionSuite is use that to flag numbers for you, like this $32. We use it to populate dashboards that you'll see throughout on your estimating dashboard and in your today screen there, and be able to see all of that at a glance just by kind of stepping through the system. We use that, of course, especially on some of the work in progress and other dashboards that I know we'll take a closer look at in just a moment here that starts to really calculate those profits. And then you always have great reporting options that you can now do to run maybe an over budget report or an estimate versus actual or something like that. But we have all this information, and most companies I work with, I think the most common thing I see is about once a week or maybe every 2 weeks for a bill paying cycle. So usually we're paying bills maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, running that import when the bills are paid, everybody has up-to-date information immediately.
Absolutely. And then for the report itself, by the way, the financial report section of each of the estimates has most of these reports available to you here as well. So as the bookkeeper for Holly's company, I can import all of these costs and our invoiced amounts. So now Holly and the team on the job would be able to go in there and see how much money have we spent, how much money have we invoiced, what's left in contract. Those would be our committed costs. And we can start to do things like run a profitability report on this job. How much did we spend and how much have we made? Or let's run an over budget report. I just want to pull out all the items that we're spending too much money on. And this way we can go through and scrutinize and say, again, a few weeks into the job, well, how do we make up for this $32 loss? We're already $32 down. Hey, granted, this isn't setting off any major alarms on a $500,000 job, but maybe that's somebody who's clocking into the wrong cost code. Maybe. Mm-hmm. Or maybe somebody went and purchased a lot of materials and coded it all to ceiling framing instead of where he started working on some of the window frames. Or, it just gives us the ability to identify it and work with that. And the people out on the job site could also do things like run, from ConstructionSuite, you can run things like labor reports. Show how many man hours we really have estimated for these so that the supervisor on the job site can keep a tight rein on his team and know exactly how many hours we're working with here. We can't go overboard with certain areas because we know exactly what we're supposed to have, and we can start to see if it's getting close. And that, all of this information that we have, it's great information and great detail to have here on the project by project. But again, it takes us into point number 4, which is the WIP report. And this is actually something that's unique to ConstructionSuite as well. We're one of a very, very small handful of companies that would offer anything even remotely like this. But we have all these numbers where we're keeping track of things like your original contract price. How much did we put out there for the customer? The current contract price is going to include any of the change orders that have already been approved. That number is then going to compare against the original job cost budget. How much are we charging the customer? How much do we think it's going to cost us? Mm-hmm. So as we continue to work through that, this is going to be plus the cost of any change orders. So again, as you put these things in, you can start to see how these numbers start to expand. How much have we spent to date? How much money is left? What's the cost to complete? This is actually one of the few fields that you can enter values into as well. If we're looking at this job and we know that the cost to complete Lot 185 Baldwin Park is actually going to be a little bit closer to, let's say, $400,000, you can adjust that. You can go ahead and put those numbers in there so that you've got a closer idea or something that better matches our gut as we're working through this project. Now the benefit here is, as you're looking at these things, it comes across. It's notifying you using some of these additional values like what's our original gross profit, where do we stand right now, have we slipped on this, are we losing money? It might not be a loss on the job, but it's certainly not what I hope to make. And again, 2%. If we're running a rager, that's after we've had a lot of successful jobs. But no, if we're running really tight margins, that 2% loss, that's it in some cases. Yeah. There it goes.
Well, think about a margin that's maybe it's not razor thin, but maybe you're looking at a 10%. A slip of 2, that's going to start to add up pretty quickly to be able to keep your eye on that.
And again,
notice.
Well, 10% on a job like this, if we're using percent margin, that's an easy number to calculate. That'd be $50,000. 2% of that, or 2% of the overall, that's $10,000. $10,000. Again, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
To slip automatically.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I'm noticing here, Ian, on this, that it also allows us to identify, and I know we'll talk about those change order best practices as well, but one of the things too to note is the impact that the change orders are going to have, and kind of the importance of applying these same best practices for how we would mark those up and what we're charging from a change order perspective as well. I can see here that my original estimated gross profit percent was different than what the final is, and that's where the change orders will start to come in, and some of the other changes on the job. So you can kind of see there's an opportunity there to be had with the change orders. There's also a pretty big opportunity to again eat into the profit for your overall project. And it's, being able to see this information and see and identify where you might be leaving money on the table, or where that might be an opportunity for you to really tighten up, can make a huge difference. I mean, like you said, that 2% seems like a small number at 2, but really on most average size jobs, that's actually a nice amount of money and something that can make a big difference.
Absolutely. And really quickly too, before we dive into those change orders, a few quick notes on the WIP report that we offer here. First of all, and for me, one of the more important tools, is the ability to export it to Excel, which we could then use to send off to the bank if we're applying for a new line of credit, or to the bonding company so that they know how much the bond needs to be. This ability to export or print the information from here it's an easy way to get the reports. I was working with a company again recently who spent weeks putting this together by hand, or no time putting it together from ConstructionSuite. Again, one of those obviously far better than the other. The other few things that I would mention in here, though, is we have the ability to snapshot, which just means that we're going to save a copy of it every so often. If you look at your snapshots, you can start to notice the trend for how you're doing. Hopefully you're trending in a better direction, or you're getting that profitability line to even out to where you want it to be. But you also have the ability to go through and adjust using these options. Things like the length of the project or the dollar figure for the project, so you can start to figure out what your sweet spot looks like as well. If you wanted to see all the jobs that are worth less than $100,000 to figure out if that's where you should invest your time, you can do that. You can adjust the WIP report to show you the $100,000 and less jobs, or maybe $100,000 to $500,000 for most of the what I'll call the standard homes that we're going to be building, or 500 plus. Maybe we're a company that does, again, Holly, you tell me, maybe we do some residential remodeling or some remodeling projects and some custom homes and some commercial projects. So 500 plus should cover most of our commercial jobs.
Sure.
Do we focus on those or the small home remodels?
Well, wouldn't it be nice to know, right?
Exactly. And this allows you to go through and apply those filters to get that set of jobs, figure out which ones are the most valuable for you, and that gives you a better idea of where you need to invest your marketing dollars, so that it gives you the best type of job for you and your company, which can, again, allow you to focus on the things that are making you the most money, making your company the most profitable.
That's right. And when I think about those of you that I've had a chance to work with, and being able, one thing I really love is being able to work with so many of you repeatedly over the years and kind of watch some of those evolutions in your business. But I think about a conversation I had with someone back a couple of weeks ago where they told me they really just didn't turn down any job ever. They didn't have a lack of jobs. It wasn't an unhealthy market or anything like that where they were. They did a variety of work because they just simply didn't turn down projects. Didn't have a lot of information either, though, about profitability and things like that. And certainly we know that different markets are going to be different and kind of support different business models for you guys in a different way. But some of the most successful clients that I've worked with, and I've again spoken with a number of you over the last year that I can think of off the top of my head, have been very convicted about exactly what types of jobs you wanted to go after, which ones you were trying to eliminate because they weren't as profitable, the number of jobs that you wanted to keep going at any given time, kind of figuring out as a business what made the most sense for you to support. Not just like a little idea, but some of you guys have done a great job and are just really convicted, like, I know this is what I need to be doing. And that's really the point where we want to help everyone get to that point where you can look at this information, look at these numbers, and really know for your business what makes the most sense, what types of jobs are going to be the best ones for you, whether that's a type, a size band, you name it. But the more information you have here, the better decisions you can make.
And these decisions then become unemotional decisions, which are really, really important. I think one of my favorite conversations that I had with somebody a few years back, they described to me the types of jobs that they turned down, and it wasn't a type of job, it was a type of client. They say they don't work for engineers, they don't work for doctors, and they don't work for middle-aged married couples that have no kids. Engineers make sense. They want to scrutinize everything, they got to figure it all out. The doctors, probably the same thing. From what I understand, this company just doesn't like working for people who think that they're all idiots. I get that. I don't want to work for those people either. And then the married couples with no kids. Well, no kids means too much time on their hands. Too much time on their hands means they're always in the way. These, by the way, they were reasonable decisions. But it seems odd because at least those first two, they make a lot of money. And if it's an emotional decision because you don't want to deal with that type of person, I mean, that's one thing. But that seems like it's leaving a lot of money on the table. And again, an emotional decision in that case. With this one, you're making smart decisions based purely on the numbers. And I love that. I think that it's a very important one to do. Now, you might figure out pretty quickly that those jobs are also not profitable jobs. So maybe we eliminate
True
them.
enough.
And sometimes the emotions lead us to the right decision. But in this case, we're getting the right decision and it might just line up. Now, along those lines, too, change orders, point number 5 here, profitability point 5. This also, it kind of leads into the same sort of discussion because so often I have worked with companies who are leaving money on the table because they're not properly documenting change orders, they're not getting signatures for change orders, or my least favorite response is, oh, this customer's nice, they're not going to try to, pull a fast one on us by not paying us for this change order. We don't have to worry about getting all the signatures and everything up for that. It is 100% wrong. The worst thing that will happen is if you ask somebody to sign something, they might say, you know what, we don't want to spend that money. So this is going to take us into change orders, and with change orders, we've got a few key pieces that are going to help you work with this to make sure that you're never leaving that money on the table, or to help avoid the fight at the end of a contract. You put together an original contract that says $500,000, you give them a final bill that brings the total up to $550,000 or something like that. I don't want to fight. I want to have happy customers who are informed. And the easiest way to do that in ConstructionSuite and Construction Online, by the way, is again, some of the reports that we offer here in ConstructionSuite or Construction Online as well. Now, I've got a change order here for exterior veneer. It's a $1,200 change order, so it's not bad. Might be one of those that we would easily kind of overlook. Mm-hmm. It's not much. I mean, again, this is 1% of the contract. That's not a big number.
Oh, do you think that's going to happen more than once? I feel like with the clients I work with, the general description is more likely that this $1,200 change order, not the exact same one, of course, but similar size, similar situations will come up not just once, but multiple times throughout the contract. So now we'll have $5,000-$10,000 worth, which impacts my profit in a different way, I think.
Absolutely. And in this case, though, drawing up those contracts, it does the one most important thing for these when you're talking about change orders to your customers. It shows them, or it highlights the impact that we're looking at. And so it's keeping them up to date, or it's keeping them in the know. So if the company, or if the customer in this case, be they a company or a future homeowner, whoever it is, if they have a $500,000 budget, and they're already stretching it a little bit with the contract in this case, if they start to see this new contract total climbing, they might they might turn down some of these changes because it's not the right time. Or maybe they don't want to continue to eat those costs. But in this case, they're looking at big picture. And this is the most important part about these change order contracts. You're always giving the customer the big picture. You're never saying, well, it's only $1,000. You're saying, well, keep in mind, big picture, again, this is the 7th one of these. And at $1,200 a pop, that's an extra fair amount of money. I mean, that's almost $10,000 right there. And that's just in a few small changes. Michael, the owner of our company, likes to talk about some of the small change orders that his supervisors and foremen would approve without any documentation. And they were simple little things like moving an outlet 4 feet in one of the rooms. Outlet's already installed. Moving it over 4 feet, the project manager, the site supervisor might say, yeah, that's no problem. We can do that. We're already in here working on things anyway. But it turns out to be a $200 or a $250 change. Well, if you tell the foreman that $250 is coming out of his paycheck, he's never going to do that again. And it's just one of those things where if you keep people thinking about this and they have a good idea of what those numbers really, really mean, everybody is going to make good, sound decisions. And at least they'll be informed. Now, plus, to add to this, with the change order contract, you can print this out and get them to sign, or if it's approved on Construction Online, they can actually digitally sign as well. Mm-hmm. So you can capture those signatures. So if the customer ever questions, let's say, again, we're working with a married couple, or maybe partners in a business, and one of the partners says, what is this $1,200? We never approved that. You can actually say, well, you should probably talk to your partner. He actually approved this and 4 other changes, and here they are. Again, one of those 2 partners might not be thrilled, but he's thrilled with you. He's just not thrilled with his partner, or her partner, or whoever it might be. So again, you're changing that dynamic of that conversation. You have happier customers, but they're happier in this case because they're well informed.
That's right. Sometimes too, we'll see situations where the client's budget is okay. You know, you've got a good starting point on the contract. We know maybe that's not even stretching the budget for the client, and there are real opportunities to be had there in some of those upgrades and change requests and things like that that may come along, but only if those things are documented. I think again, you know, just in working with a couple of you out there who've had situations where didn't seem like it was a stretch for the budget, so like, sure, I know they're good for it, yeah, we'll go ahead and get the ball rolling on this, only to find that when the invoice came a month down the road, then there was a question, or I thought you said it was only this much. And you know, those misunderstandings may be haggling, those misunderstandings may be genuine misunderstandings. It really doesn't matter. Having the documentation in place ahead of time is really the difference maker here between whether or not that's profitable or not for you. Now, a common question, if we kind of look back on cost estimating or construction online, and when you start to put these things together, common question that I get from my clients when they're working with putting change orders together is, wait a second, why does the profit that I've already set for the estimate not show up in my change order? Is something wrong? And do I need to make an adjustment? And the answer is no, nothing's wrong at all. But what we've done is purposely give you a system. First of all, we don't want to make your actual margin number incorrect. So including the change orders would do that. But also what we want is to have you the opportunity to go ahead and apply a different markup to the change order. Your best practice, and in most cases, the change orders are going to cost you more to begin with, just because we're not pre-planning for those with the project. Usually they're going to be more costly to you and your business. So your best practice is going to be maybe decide as a company that you need to have sort of a minimum markup that you would apply to change orders that's normally going to be more than what you would apply to that original contract.
Mm-hmm. And that's, again, taking a step out of the UDA platform here as well. Holly, you kind of touched on something that I think is really important. I have, again, all my years working with construction and doing some of our own construction as well, and all of my years working with construction, I have never found a company who really, really loved change orders. Never once. And the most common mistake that I see with change orders, I guess it would be the second most common. The most common is not getting signatures and not putting together the documentation, because then it's easy to contest. The second most common is not charging appropriately for those change orders. And that usually comes in for those markups. Change orders are they're a pain. You're in some cases ripping out something that's already there and replacing it. So you're doing damage in order to give the customer what they're looking for. And again, it's a burden. These are things that you didn't account for. You've got to do additional running around to make sure that you got the right people, the right materials, and all these different things. If you, as a company, if your company is in the habit of charging the exact same percentage for all your change orders as you do for your original contract, the only person you're hurting is yourself. You should always charge more for those change orders, because they do require more. If the person, the contact that you had worked with, the client on the job, if they were asking for this stuff ahead of time, then you could plan for it appropriately. But because you have to do all that extra running around for those change orders, it costs you more. And the easiest way to track that cost is to make sure that your profit margins are a little bit higher on those change orders. Now again, for something like ConstructionSuite, you can put those in as the line item markups. For Construction Online, when you're going into the financials and you're adding in your change orders here, you can add that markup directly to what the customer is going to be paying for these jobs too. So if you're looking at one of these, under the markup and price section, it gives you an easy way where you can just put in that dollar markup. And again, this might be a fantastic place for you to just put in the small dollar figure that you think is going to be an added cost. If you're uploading these from Construction Online, it automatically, or from ConstructionSuite to Construction Online, it automatically puts that markup value in there. But again, it's just an easy way for you to track how much you're going to be charging. And most importantly, it gives you the place to put in your special client tax. If you have somebody who's making a lot of these change orders and you want to start to price them in such a way that they'll think twice about that. I found that in some cases it's a good deterrent for somebody who comes in and they keep changing their mind. You start adding in a slightly higher markup every time they change their mind, and you got to get these things approved. Again, it may or may not cost extra to do that, but they're having long conversations. And they're pulling a lot of your people off the work that they're doing to have these conversations, and they're forcing you to put together additional paperwork. It's expensive. We don't want to have the same conversation 15 times, and an easy deterrent for that is to apply a markup that's going to make them think twice. So definitely take a look at that. We do have a question here, by the way, about the thumbs up and the thumbs down, approving or rejecting on behalf of your customers. This is certainly an option. If you ever have a site super or a foreman or anybody on the job site who's doing that on behalf of your customer, make sure that you have them sign off on it as well. You want some documented proof that your customer did want to move forward with that. So if you ever use this little approve or reject for the client, get that. Could be an email, could be a signature, whatever you've got to get.
That's right. And keep in mind, if you're using Construction Online to capture these approvals, you'll see the thumbs up if the client goes in. So it offers the client a couple of different ways to make that approval. Usually they're going in through their client portal to do that. So when the client goes into their portal, they'll make the approval. What you'll get, of course, is an email notification that they have gone ahead and approved that. And you'll see that change in your Construction Online account where you see the thumbs up that we have here. But anytime a client approves that, it does prompt them for a digital signature right in the portal. So as part of that approval process, they do have to go ahead and sign. So you can actually print those documents up with the signature printed already on it that they've signed digitally for you. You also have the option, if someone is on site writing up that change order or looking at it with the client, to go ahead and hit that approve button and have the client sign right on your phone. You know, you can pull it up and have them just do a quick digital signature right on the phone. So all of that, you know, is being captured as the client is making the approval.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if at any point you do decide, even after getting that digital signature, that you want to print up a contract, especially from Construction Online, you still can. All of that information can still be printed up. It can still be generated. You can still save it as a PDF into your project so your customer can go back and reference it at any time. Again, we're still going paperless. You're not eating into that $20,000 paper budget that you've just eliminated. You're just giving them a PDF that they could then pull up through their portal. And if you ever want to see what that portal looks like, by the way, this is probably part of another discussion for another time. But keep in mind that with new Construction Online, you can actually go over to the Team tab, right-click on one of your contacts, and preview their portal. And a lot of the times, this is a great tool to use on the sales front, because you can say, you know, customer, this is the tool that we use for all of our management and our documentation. You've got a really easy way to come in here and see everything that you would want to see for the job, and it gives you all these great tools and resources for you to see all the change orders, and you can see the progress on the job, and all these great tools. You've got the ability to go through and generate all of this and share it with them as part of that sales process. Again, my favorite to date was one of our customers actually sold a $2 million project because he used this. He actually pulled this up and said, this is how we're going to communicate. And even though you're out of the state most of the time, you can still have up to the minute details because you can just log in here anytime you want and see everything that you're working on. Now, real quick, there's one last question in here that I think we've got flagged. So how do we print off the change order from Construction Online showing their signature? Again, that's the report. So if we go back into Hours, go into Financials, again, if you need the easy way to get to those financial reports or the change order contract, you can either click on the little settings wheel above all your your change orders here and run one of the change order contracts. Or even better, you can actually just dive right into the financial reports. You can run reports for pretty much anything that you have in the Financials tab. And those reports, by the way, would include some of the ones that we took a look at from ConstructionSuite earlier too. Some of the financials like estimate versus actuals or profitability reports that are in there too. So they're all available to you there, and it'll generate as a PDF, which you could then print out directly from the web page if you wanted to do a printout and save it as a hard copy or whatever. Which again, hopefully we can get you guys away from that because there's that $20,000 budget again. But ultimately, that's going to cover, I think, the 5 ways to make a more profitable business. Again, just a quick recap. Number one we have in here is as automation and paperless. Take advantage of the technologies and leverage these tools to help you cut out some of the extra time that you're wasting with double entry, or the paper costs that you guys have, or the travel expenses. Nobody thinks about how forgetting a folder in the office would make somebody go from a job site to the office and back again. That might be what seems like a short little 5 or 10 minute trip, but that adds up fast, really fast. That's a lot of wasted hours. So number one, again, look for those technology tools to make you more effective. We offer a lot. Number two, accurate estimates. Accurate, by the way, doesn't always mean that you've got the right price, but it does mean that you've got to know your price. Don't fudge the numbers. Always estimate accordingly and use things like line item markups or the right company overhead margin percentage calculation tools to give you the right result. The bookkeeper is talking about one number. You want to make sure that you match. Number three, of course, job costing. Look at this regularly. Don't wait. If you wait, you've already lost money. It doesn't even matter if you were spot on. You've had the option to go in there and make adjustments and fix things. So do that. Number three is really important. And then number four, looking at the reporting tools like the WIP report, that also needs to be done on a regular basis, and share it with the people who are most impacted by the cost of the jobs. So if it's going to be your bookkeepers or your project managers or your sales team, they need to know they're selling the right jobs. You need to figure out if those are the right jobs, and with tools like the WIP report, you can find that very, very quickly. And then, of course, last and probably most importantly, put the change orders in. Get your contracts for those, and please stop leaving that money out there or hoping that your customers are just going to open their wallets every time you ask. If it works 90% of the time, that 10% that it fails you is going to be some of the most painful stuff you do all year. So just don't risk it. Make sure that you document everything. All right, and I think that that's going to cover what we have for you guys today. Holly, have we left anything else out?
No, I don't think so. I feel like we were talking before this webinar. I feel like there are probably 100 other tools in the software platforms that you guys can use to really leverage technology to build more profitable projects, more profitable businesses. But I think that looking at those 5 that we covered today, if you guys implemented just one of those changes, if you come away from this meeting with one idea of something that you can implement, I think you'll be surprised at how much that can start to then impact your profitability, both on a job-by-job basis and on a company basis. If you come away with best practices for 3 or 4 new things that you can implement, you're going to see a huge difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, we're taking these from our experience working with, at this point, hundreds of thousands of different users across many, many different countries. We always want to provide for you the best. And that's what we've hopefully done for you guys today. And we'll do it again next week as well. On Wednesday, we've got an additional lunch and learn. We're actually going to be starting at 1 o'clock Eastern. We're going to be going over quality assurance and audits in Construction Online. So we're going to be reviewing some of the projects and talking about some of the ways to not only find what you did right, but make sure that you do it right everywhere else too. So join us for that one. Until then, guys, we really appreciate your time joining us today for the webinar. And again, this has been our 5 ways to boost profits for 2019 and hopefully every year afterwards. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we'll talk to you guys again next time.
Have a great afternoon.
Yeah, take care, everyone.